Hello, everybody. Thanks. Thanks. My name is Tom Abranovich. I'll let you guys know that I'm a very anxiety-filled public speaker. So if I start to get nervous, my face starts to get red, just bear with me. I'll get more comfortable, I'll tell some jokes, we'll all have some fun. So I do have material that I'll probably be reading off of, since I probably can't remember a lot of this stuff. It's about 2 hours, so relax, enjoy yourselves. First, let's see. Next slide. So the agenda, I'll go give you an introduction. Tom Abranovich, application support engineer for Moss Adams. I'll give you a little background, talk about the challenges, talk about our vision, the requirements that we had for going with the document management solution, our implementation, the results, and what we're doing for the future. Page 1. So I work out of the national office in Seattle, and I support the firm as a whole, but I'm also the dedicated support for Moss Adams Wealth Advisors, which is the wealth management offering of Moss Adams LLP. They're both headquartered in Seattle, Washington. MAWA has about 40 partners and employees spread across 8 locations across the West Coast. As of this year, the assets under management is about $1.9 billion. Our deployment, let's see. Since I began supporting MAWA a couple years ago, I've seen constant growth within the organization. So much that they've outgrown a majority of their financial applications and can no longer use a simple Windows file directory to manage their documents. They've required something a little more robust. The now COO of MAWA suggested, and MAWA is Moss Adams Wealth Advisors for short. I'll be mentioning that a lot, just so I don't have to say it. The now COO of MAWA suggested that we look at Laserfiche as their document management solution. My first experience with Laserfiche was last year at this conference. I knew nothing about the application. I had a short demo with our VAR. Came here, got a lot of hands-on, had a lot of ideas that I jotted down, but I couldn't really grasp what I could do with the application until I really got my hands on it. So after all the paperwork settled, our installation and configuration began in late April, and we deployed it in early July, mid-July. Now I'm back this year to learn a little bit more about forms and a little bit more of advanced workflows and advanced work with quick fields. So when we step back and look at our current document management and review process, we realized that it wasn't pretty and it needed a lot of work. Oops. Page 2. So our file structure was a mess. Employees had the ability to delete, rename, move files with no administrative oversight. Document delivery was inconsistent and expensive. All client documents needed to be funneled through MAWA's central operations team in Seattle after being scanned and prepared at one of our local offices. That meant all physical and electronic documents needed to be emailed, faxed, or physically mailed, mostly overnight, so they were scanned and processed in a timely manner from all 8 locations. Throw in a complicated, undocumented review process and no true search capabilities, and you have the ingredients for a world of frustration. Not to mention that we have an entire file room, physical file room, which made it impossible to search, and it takes up valuable office space. So how do we improve these current processes and allow our employees as an organization and the organization as a whole to work smarter and more efficiently? Next slide. Ooh, I keep hitting the wrong one. All right, our vision. We need to make some drastic improvements to overcome these issues. So we sat down and we agreed on a common vision. We wanted to eliminate the passing of physical documents between offices as much as possible, clearly define our review processes, standardize document naming and filing, streamline document processing, and increase overall efficiency for employees and administrators. And finally, we needed a plan to clean out the file room with minimal administrative overhead. So the search began. Next. Mawa Search actually began about 10 years ago for a document management solution. So they've been dealing with this for a while. And it wasn't until recently that the wheels started to get in motion and that a new document management solution would soon be a reality. The requirements were mainly derived from our common vision. We needed it to automate document naming and filing, have robust search capabilities, incorporate our review process, and provide options to digitize our file room. But we also needed it to integrate with our CRM solution, which is Juncture, and be scalable to maintain projected growth. Enter Laserfiche. So I won't bore you with a long-winded presentation, but I'll highlight some of the more interesting pieces that you may be able to integrate into your current environment, or to give you some things to think about if you haven't deployed Laserfiche yet. I can't really take full credit for the entire implementation. Our VAR, namely Justin Steen back here, from Cities Digital, he provided some really useful guidance and support along the way in order to get this moving. So what did we do? We used import agent, quick fields, and workflow to automate the physical document submission process by using back-end databases to populate metadata fields in order to direct documents through the review process. We defined our review process at a document level, then designed individual workflows for each step of the process using customized templates and field permissions to increase efficiency and reduce errors. We created business processes to overcome unforeseen obstacles in our environment. And we designed a simple, consistent electronic document submission process, as well as providing a free area where employees can prepare documents prior to submission. Finally, we used a combination of folder and metadata permissions to provide overall consistency and reduce errors. So, this is the fun part. So, as I mentioned previously, we have 8 offices across along the West Coast. Import agent runs from our Laserfiche server in Seattle and monitors each local file share in each location. The end user scans a physical document using either a desktop scanner or a multifunction device into the monitored folder. Import agent then picks up the file shortly thereafter, a document is scanned, and moves it into the Laserfiche repository to be processed by quick fields. All identified documents, which I'll talk about later, are imported into a dedicated quick fields processing location within the repository. I'll give you a quick tip about import agent. There's a setting in the advanced profile options, which you can set a time where it monitors the folder. So if you have a large scan job and it's monitoring the folder consistently and picking up the file, it'll pick up that temporary file before that scan finishes, and you won't be able, the copy is only a temporary file, it's not the file itself. And if this option is not adjusted, large scan jobs will be imported into Laserfiche before the job's completes, creating an unreadable temp file. That's why I wrote this stuff down. All right, so barcode cover sheet. Before I start talking about our scanning process, I'll point out the document types that we have in our environment. There's 2 distinct document types. One is identified documents, meaning documents that require approval or need to be filed in a specific folder. Other is everything else, correspondence, meeting notes. They can be filed in any folder. They don't require any type of review. So for the sake of time, I'll just focus on our identified documents. To make it easier on the end users when submitting physical documents, I created custom barcode cover sheets for the identified documents and forms. These cover sheets are inserted at the beginning of the document and are used when processed by quick fields. To make it, I have a separate barcode cover sheet for each identified document, but hopefully in the future I can make a dynamic PDF where there's just drop downs and the data is populated. But for now, I use mail merge. It's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple barcode cover sheet. The design of the cover sheet is simple, and it's easily created using mail merge. 3-digit barcode is hard-coded into the cover sheet to identify the document. The end user is only required to enter the client ID into the cover sheet in order for it to process successfully. They also have the ability to enter an optional name that appends to our standard naming convention. One of the great things with Laserfiche is that it'll name documents for you. So we wanted a standardized naming convention. So we use a client ID, last name, first name, and a document name. But when you have custodian forms, there could be multiple forms with the same name for dependents or whoever that gets submitted, and then you have change of address with a 2, and then change of address with a 3, and it made it really hard to determine what document it was. So what I did was I added an optional name at the end so they can add in this optional name into the barcode cover sheet, which will then pull when it's processed by Quick Fields. And this is available in both electronic and physical document submission. And I also put in a section for their juncture ID, which is the ID in our CRM application. So because when you scan things through a multifunction device, you really don't know who's doing the scanning on the other end. I thought it would be useful, but I really haven't got much use out of it. So, oops. So once identified document is submitted and processed by import agent, the file is dropped in a step 1 folder of Quick Fields processing area that matches the Quick Fields classification. That was a suggestion from Justin, which I kind of expanded on. The file resides in this folder until it's processed by Quick Fields. Even though one classification could process, because it's just a simple barcode cover sheet, one classification could really process all of the document types, the identified documents. I use separate classifications to make it easier to manage and troubleshoot. So I split them into like Fidelity, Schwab, 529, and then our internal documents. And it just makes it easier when looking through the logs, and instead of having to look through one, I can kind of separate it out. So if somebody is coming to me and saying, oh, I submitted this Schwab form, I can easily look at Quick Fields and look at the logs without having to go through all the documents that have been submitted. So here's a quick rundown of the processing steps. The pre-classification identifies a new document by the barcode on the cover sheet. The number in the barcode is read and is processed by the classification that matches the ID range. Our internal documents are 101 to 199. So if it falls into that range, it's processed by the internal document processing. Once classified, we use barcode and RCA, or OCR page processing to pull the barcode ID, the client ID, the optional name values, which are captured by a temporary Quick Fields template that I created. Just a quick tip. So if you're using OCR and you're using numbers, I use a condition on there that substitutes any O, or upper or lowercase o, to a 0, which worked out pretty well. Once processed, the file is then moved to an outgoing Quick Fields folder where it's picked up by the initial document processing window. So it's import agent brings it into step 1, it awaits the Quick Fields processing, and then it moves it down to step 2 where a workflow is waiting for it. So the initial document processing workflow queries backend databases that reside on our Laserfiche SQL server. The first query uses the barcode ID hard-coded in the cover sheet, and what it'll do is it'll read that ID, and then I create the query tokens, and it pulls the document name, the document type, and the document category. I also use a query for Juncture, our CRM. So by the client ID, it will pull the client first name, the client last name, the spousal information, the first advisor, second advisor, and the admin, and their email addresses into the metadata. The third query uses the Juncture ID to pull the submission information, but I didn't show that here. So once all the metadata has been populated by the database queries, the workflow uses either the document ID or the document type to determine the review path. Once the review path is determined, a customized template is applied to the document. And I'll talk about customized templates a little bit later. So after we sat down and defined all the required paths based on the identified documents, we started planning out our workflows. So at first I envisioned one workflow per document to keep it simple, but that turned out not to be efficient. As new documents were added, I had to either create a new workflow or copy and alter an existing one. And then I thought about creating one giant workflow that encompassed all documents and review teams, but that was a little too much to handle. So I decided to build compartmentalized review workflows for each team. This allowed me to reuse the workflow no matter where it was needed in the review path. It also made troubleshooting a lot easier. The structure of the review workflow is essentially the same for every team. It's either a new or reworked document, and it's either approve or deny. Deny, because I pull the email and the advisor and the admin, if a document goes through the review process and it's denied, it uses that metadata information to send a notification back to the admin. And it actually moves the document into the admin's review folder and sends them a notification. I use the review team email boxes and email pulled from my database queries earlier to send notifications during the review process. So here's a shot of our, just a section of our workflow repository for files for review. What I wanted to do was I wanted to keep all the review folders concealed into one root folder, which is the files for review. The document never leaves this area until the document completes its path and is either deleted by the submitter, if it requires. So I give this option. If something is kicked back from, say, compliance because there's not a signature, they can deny it. That document will go back to our CRA folder and be dropped in, and it'll be dropped into one of our admins. And then they have the option of either deleting that, or they can make whatever correction they need to, change the review, and then it actually goes back to compliance or whatever review team sent it back to them. So, as I mentioned earlier, once a review path has been determined, a customized template is applied to the document. These templates are based on just our default client information template, but what I've done is I've added a review field positioned at the top of the template. So everything below the review templates is our default client information template, and these are just customized because what happens is if I was to use a default template across all review segments, the review field will always be positioned at the bottom, so the reviewer always has to scroll down to the bottom to get to their review field, which made it kind of inefficient. So as the document is passed between different review teams, an associated custom template is applied. Once a document completes the review path, the default client information template is applied, and the review fields are moved down to the bottom, so we can keep track that, yes, it was approved by whatever teams are in that review path. And then the document's moved out of the review area into the repository and then filed into the client folder. So while I'm talking about workflows, I'll jump into how we use business processes. So I don't really use the reporting aspect of business processes. I really use them for admin functions and to extend end user functionality that is kind of lost in the way that I have the permissions set up in our client folders. So let's see. So I've set up all of our compartmentalized review workflows as business processes. So in case there's an error along the way or just something happens with the document that it needs to be rerun, we can fix that document and then run the workflow, the business process for that particular review, which will start that over again and start it in the review process again without having to go through from the beginning. So I also have a business process that a lot of times, there'll be a divorce or a marriage and a name will change, but what happens is the repository isn't updated when the client record is updated in Juncture. So I also have a business process that you can right-click on the folder in Laserfiche, and it'll actually use the same query that I use to pull the client information. It'll pull that new name, and it'll rename that client folder. So I'll speak more about security and permission settings later, but I will mention that our client folders are tightly locked down. Because of this, default users, they don't have the ability to rename, to change any of the metadata, to move or delete documents once it's finalized in the client folder. To work around this, I created 3 business process functions that allow the end user to have this functionality while preserving the client folder strict permissions. So one is a rename process. So after the rename business process is run, the document is moved into an action area into the repository, which is outside the client folder, which allows me to control the permissions just on that action folder. The employee is allowed to then change the appended portion of the name by editing the rename metadata value or metadata template. So our standardized name can't be changed. The only thing that they're able to change is the optional name. Or if it's an other document, which is just correspondence that they can name whatever they want, they also have the ability to change that name there as well. It is a 2-step process, but it does give that functionality back to the end user as far as being able to rename a document. We also have a move business process. And that's pretty much just what it sounds like. It gives them the ability to move documents between folders in the client folder. It's similar to the rename process where it moves it down into an actions folder. The one caveat is the employee only has the ability to move documents that are not identified, meaning correspondence, documents that can be filed in any one of the folders. That's the only permission they have to move those files. And then I have a delete business process, which moves a file into a delete folder and notifies our client services team. And they actually take a look at the document. If they approve the delete, they just change the rename activity to, or the move activity, or the delete activity, sorry, to delete, and then deletes the document. If they don't feel that the document should be deleted, they can cancel it, and it'll actually file the document where it was previously. So now I'll go into electronic document submission. I wanted to keep the process simple. And I wanted to make sure that the end user needed to provide the minimal amount of data in order to process the document. Less typing equals less errors. So the way that I created this was the user only uses one template, which is the client information manual entry, and they use one folder to submit any electronic documents. So the document submission template, I use dynamic fields to populate client information and the associated MAWA personnel, as well as the document information. By request, they wanted to be able to search by last name and not by client ID because they deal more with names. So once the first name and last name are chosen, the client ID will automatically populate. It'll populate the spousal information, and then it'll also populate the advisor 1, the advisor 2, and their associated email addresses. Then the user chooses the document type, which will give them a trimmed list of associated document names. So here they choose the internal form, Once they choose internal, there's a trimmed list of the document name. Once they choose that document name, the document category and the document ID will be populated. Again, the document ID is used to determine what review path that document is going to take. Other than entering the optional name information, the employee doesn't really have to type in anything else. All it is drop-downs. If the wrong template is chosen or the metadata isn't fully populated, the document will just sit in the autofile folder until the workflow start conditions are met. So the workflow is set to run on new and modified entry, and this allows the user to go back. If it's just sitting there, they can go back and fix the document. And then once they fix it and all the conditions have been met, the document gets processed. So originally, this was the only way to submit documents, through the autofile folder or through the autofile folder and that one client information manual entry template. But we found that employees needed a place to prepare documents prior to submission. So I created a workspace, a staff workspace in the repository. So what this essentially is a free area for both individuals and review teams. They have full access to delete, rename, they can create subfolders. There's no requirements when moving documents into the free area. When a user decides to submit a document from the free area, they simply change the template to the client information manual entry and populate the metadata like they did in the previous section. So with that, I'll go into permissions and user rights. I have everything locked down, and users aren't very happy about it, but that's the way it has to be to maintain consistency. The majority of our users are in a default user group, which is pretty tightly locked down. They can only submit documents using the autofile folder or from the staff workspace. Client folders are virtually off limits, other than viewing the finalized documents and adding any kind of annotations. The thought was that all preparation, review, and possible rework will be completed outside of the client folder. Only finalized documents would make it into the client folder. Default users have read access to the team review folders so they can see where their document is in the review process. And they have read-only to the quick fields processing area. Our team review groups have elevated permissions for their review folder, but they essentially have the same permissions as the default user group. There's only one group, the admin group, that has permission for everything. In order to reduce areas within the review process, I locked down the review metadata fields, so the review fields that I have in the customized templates. I have those locked down so only that review team can change that metadata entry, because what I found was that when it would go back to the admin to rework, instead of changing their own review, they would accidentally change the team review, and that would, it would really mess up how the workflow was running. Right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to go over as far as different aspects of our deployment and our implementation. Hopefully some of these will be useful to you. So the results, really any widespread changes that are going to be met with concern and uncertainty from the end user. After the initial shock of such a drastic change, most of our users were comfortable with the new processes, try to keep them simple. As long as you have a clearly documented training material and keep the process simple, users had no problem getting acclimated. Some people find the document submission a little tedious as far as having to populate those. I'm working towards making that a little bit easier, but that minimal amount of work on the front end makes the organization operate that much more efficiently, because we don't have to worry about naming the files and where they're getting filed and somebody deleting a file by accident. And then, so the future. Yeah, that's our file room. So right now, we want to convert some of our internal forms to Laserfiche forms. That's why I'm here. We want to clear out our file room, which is actually currently in progress. I just made some small tweaks to the barcode cover sheet. So it's really just the barcode ID, and then I have a barcode generator that generates from the client ID. It's a simple Excel spreadsheet. So there's no administrative overhead. We brought some temps in. They go and they scan a whole client packet full of documents, and then they slip sheet in electronic PDFs between the documents, and then they scan it all in. The documents are separated based on that barcode, and it all gets processed pretty efficiently when I remove color. So we're always trying to make improvements and trying to improve the user experience. Me, being the designer and the administrator, I don't really process any of these documents. I don't do any of the reviews. So the only thing that I can suggest is to talk to the people who are using this application on a daily basis. Keep that line of communication open. Their critique, comments, and suggestions are the only way that I'm able to get a sense of their frustrations and tweak our system so they're happier with it. So, questions? Thanks. We're going to have a mic so we can bring it to you if you have questions.
Hi, I'm wondering if you could talk to me. You said that when they enter the client ID that's automatically populating a bunch of information.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing that with token collectors, or how are you making it populate immediately?
So when I was actually here at the conference, I took one of the workflow classes, and one was about, I had the idea of, because we already have a database with our client information. So if we could leverage that information and pull it just by using the client ID. So what I did was, here I did a query into Juncture. So the problem is that you have to have your database, the database you're querying, it has to be on the same server as a Laserfiche server. So working with Cities Digital, we created a view of just the information that I needed. So these are the headers from that. So what happens is when I query Juncture, I query it based on the client ID, and then all the other tokens are populated by last name, first name. So it's just pulling that information and populating those tokens. Sure.
I think you said earlier you wrote a workflow and went in and changed all your O's to zeros.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's a client ID, and it's a numerical, it's just numbers. So sometimes quick fields, the OCR reads a 0 as like a lowercase o, or it reads it as an O. So when it processes, so if it can't read the client ID, I have it set that it'll move it to a different folder, and I noticed that some with zeros were being moved over. And when I looked at the log files, it was like 35, small o, 62. So yeah, and it took a little while to figure that out, but yeah, it seems to be working with no issue.
So it wasn't everything in your whole database. You didn't change every O.
No, it's just a condition that if.
Was like B08. Okay, I get it.
No, okay, sure.
Other questions? Yes.
Can you relatively simply discuss how the barcodes are generated, so that are they generated on demand when something's created? Do you have a stack?
I have a stack. So I used mail merge, and pretty much the same database. This same database I use as a mail merge, and for the barcode field, you can download, I think it's like free 3 of 9 font, and just set that as the font on on the barcode cover sheet that you're going to use to generate the mail merge. And then it actually creates it. You just need to use an asterisk and then the number and an asterisk for it to read the barcode. But it's just a simple mail merge that you can use.
So do you have just a stack of 106s laying around? 'Cause if you have a client ID, somehow you have to be doing this right when you're doing it, right?
Well, all the barcode IDs are associated with a specific document. So if we look,
So the barcode is only the doc type.
exactly.
So
So
you have a 106 barcode in a clear piece of paper somebody can pull out and say this is a 106.
exactly. So anybody who's submitting, the IPS, the investment policy statement, they're gonna take and print out. They're gonna type in the client ID into the PDF, and then they're gonna print out They're gonna print out that barcode cover sheet, put it on top of their physical document, and just scan it. So it can be reused for any client if they're submitting that. That's why we went through and identified all documents that we're using in our environment.
On your barcode, it had a client ID. So
Yeah. Let me go back. Yeah, so they're putting in the client ID. So they're bringing up this PDF. They're typing in the client ID that
they
they're.
have a fillable PDF that has the barcode hard-coded.
Exactly.
So they're pulling up PDF 106,
Exactly.
filling in client ID 27 and printing it.
Right.
We kind of did the same thing, but without the barcode, we just used text to do what we call page separators. And so you don't have to buy the extra, sorry, Laserfiche, but you don't have to buy the extra module to read the barcode. You can just do it with the text. It's probably not as accurate, because we do have some exceptions that happen, because sometimes the OCR, just like you said,
Has a
doesn't
mind
read
of its own.
exactly like
Yeah.
we do, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we were finding with the client ID, and that's why we had to change the O's to zeros, is because it
Right,
wasn't
I
reading
wrote
it
that
correct.
down because I know I have some human resource documents that get kicked out, and that's probably why. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Hi, are you doing bulk scanning or just like one document at a time?
As long as they're the same, so the buttons that I have set up on like a Ricoh multifunction device, so they have one that says MAWA 529, they have one that says MAWA internal. So if you have, a stack of Schwab forms that you need to submit, as long as you have that separator, you can scan them all at the same time. Because what QuickFields will do is every time it reads that barcode, it'll separate it into a different document.
But you have to tell it which path it's going through to start with?
You have to, yeah, I mean, I could put it all in one folder and have it scan through, because pretty much all the classifications are the same. It's the same OCR fields, it's the same barcode reader fields. It's just easier for me when I have to troubleshoot it. That's why I like keeping them split up. Now, if somebody were to accidentally scan a document into, say, the 529 folder, it would still get processed. Because what I am is I'm looking through all of those 529, Fidelity, internal, Schwab. I'm looking through all of those folders. So even though if it might be scanned into the wrong folder, it's still going to get processed. It's just easier for me.
Other questions?
From what you
Yes.
said, it seems like your timelines were pretty aggressive. I mean, you did it in under a year, right?
Late April to mid-July. And I pretty much did everything. I'm not patting myself on the back, but I did
impressive.
all the UAT testing, all the documentation. I mean, it was only for 40 users, but it was still quite a bit of work.
So how did you determine what you were going to tackle? So it sounds like, I mean, obviously with financial services, this can't be a 100% solution. Nothing's ever going to be 100%
Right.
automated in financial services. So how did you the line of what you were gonna go after in this round?
I mean, we do have phase two, one being the file room, but, you know, we actually sat down, you know, with all of our review teams and went through the different documents. And even then, like, if you have no experience with Laserfiche, like, you have an idea of how you want to set up the review process. But it's pretty much trial and error and what worked and, you know, guidance from somebody who's knowledgeable. But it just evolved, I would say. I got not proficient, but I was able to change things on the fly pretty quickly. And then, you know, I will say after the first check-in meeting, you know, a lot of people were asking different questions, and I was able to tweak stuff and to add that optional name and to test it really quickly. But really, I had no idea what the application could do, so I didn't have a clear vision of what it was going to do for us. It kind of just evolved, and, you know, just trying to do one big workflow didn't work, and then trying to do one for document didn't work, and then, you know, it was just really trial and error.
Other questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Let's give Tom another round of applause.
Thanks. I hope this was helpful.